Hello, welcome to the Wisdom in Times of Crisis online event, where we explore the wisdom of these challenging times. My name is Jean-Ric Meller, and I have the great pleasure to be in a conversation with Chris Fields and Davor Džalto. Chris Fields, how to describe you? You are an independent researcher with a background in physics, information theory, biology, neuroscience, and you study the nature of consciousness, that is, how one part of the universe, us, can be aware of the other parts. Is it fair to say?
Yes, that's quite fair.
Your bio also says that you've been a volunteer firefighter, a visual artist, a travel writer, and that now you live half of the time in the small French village of Cône-Minervois near Carcassonne. That's quite a diverse background. And Davor, you're a professor in religion, art, and democracy. That's quite a combination.
Yeah, quite a combination. But I enjoy all these different hats that I also wear from time to time, just like pretty much similar to Chris, except that my focuses are not that much physics and consciousness per se, but rather the issues such as human creativity, freedom, and these kind of things.
Well, I look forward to hear what this part has to say about the current crisis. But just for openings, we have there are two words in English that come from the same Latin root, actually. And that word is in Latin is species, and it means appearance. And those two words are spatial and species. And it is true that as a cultural assumption, it is a very strong one for human beings that as a species, we are special. There is a sort of anthropomorphic exceptionalism where we think we are humans, an evolutionary culmination, rather than the youngest species to join the list of living things. But what if we drop that assumption? What if we looked at this as only an appearance, a species, and if we were to look at humanity as just another organism? So I'll let you take whoever wants to take on that first.
Well, let me say something here. This specialness assumption has been with us a long time, probably from the invention of language at any rate, but certainly dominates our cultural thinking with the invention of agriculture and cities, which is a huge transition in human evolution. And with that effectively increase in power over the environment, enabled by agriculture and cities, we further distanced ourselves from the idea of ourselves as organisms. And nature keeps tapping us on the shoulder now and then and reminding us that we're organisms and that we're part of a much larger living structure, which is all of life, or the biome, or whatever you want to call it, Gaia. And that to the extent that we forget that, we get into trouble, and we interpret things in ways that don't make any sense. So we currently have this idea of coronavirus as a disease that is attacking us. And from our point of view, that's an accurate characterization. But it's also, I think, very useful to think about the current situation from the point of view of the virus, right? The virus is not a living creature, but it's nonetheless a replicating evolutionary phenomenon. And it's subject to natural selection in the same way that we are, except natural selection works very rapidly. And from its point of view, we're habitat. We're just a place to live. And it's lived in many different places before. And in fact, I recently read a nice paper from Betty Korber's group in Los Alamos about where the various parts of this virus came from. And there are hundreds, thousands, maybe many more of viruses very similar to this floating around in wild populations. And some of them will probably eventually make their way into the human part of their habitat, their potential habitat. And once they start inhabiting us, natural selection will increase the population of viral variants that inhabit us successfully. And what does that mean? Well, it means viruses that inhabit lots of us and viruses that move easily from person to person. But if you're a virus and you kill your host, you destroy your habitat, then your evolutionary line ends. So natural selection tends to drive these systems in the direction of successfully inhabiting their host forever. And if you look at the human genome, it's probably about slightly more than a third viruses that have been inhabiting our lineage since the early divergence of the mammals. So long, long before primates came into existence. So these are some of the most successful viruses in the universe because they inhabit every mammal and have very little effect and are now essential parts of our genomes. So we have to keep them alive. We're in a sense, they're domestic animals. So I think it's useful to kind of turn the tables on this notion of human specialness and think about the humans ourselves as individuals and as populations from the point of view of other parts of life. And what you see is something that's interestingly different from what you see when you think only from the perspective of an individual human or the special species of human beings.
Yeah, so from the point of view of the virus, we are a habitat, and that habitat is just we can think of it as just the way the universe, the earth is for us. It has its challenges and it has its dangers, and for the virus, we are not a we are a habitat, but a dangerous one, right?
Yes, we're very dangerous. We have an immune system that doesn't like viruses. We have a very active microbiome that doesn't particularly like viruses. So we're a very challenging habitat to live in.
Mm-hmm. And we are determined to get rid of. But from a point of view of you say that it's the evolutionary advantage for the virus to keep us alive. Yes, that is correct. But the virus doesn't, quote, know that. Since it's the first time it's invading, it's going to do what it's going to do. And
well, yeah.
we are relatively lucky that this one is relatively innocuous, correct?
Right.
That
Yes.
if it had been a virus like Ebola, mutating to transmit through the air, we would have had a much worse epidemic.
we would be in much worse shape and
Yes.
and be looking at a much worse future. Yes.
Very good. Davor, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, I like the way Chris put the whole drew the whole picture. But I would slightly it's not even a disagreement, but rather pointing to one dimension of our being special in this world. And that is that we are in a pretty unique position among all other species that we can destroy the whole entire life on this planet. So as far as we know, so far, no other virus or animal or anybody else is in a position to do that. So that, among other things, makes us very special, and we are also in the position to actually make that decision. Do we want to sustain life on this planet and sustain human life on this planet together with animal and all sorts of other life forms, or are we going to destroy the very possibility of organized human life and most of animal and other life in the world? So there is something that each, I would say, species is special in many different ways, has certain capacities that others do not have. So we cannot just fly like birds, and birds cannot do many things that we can. But I think this is pretty unique as far as we know. And Chris, please correct me if you can think of anything else in this history of the whole evolution up to this moment, where one form of life became so overpowerful, so dominant, that it threatens the existence of the planet or the entire life on the planet.
Oh, well, it's certainly true that no other species has invented nuclear warfare, thankfully. Other species have certainly invented climate change before. And it first happened with the cyanobacteria that are responsible for Earth having an atmosphere that contains a significant amount of oxygen. And when that change occurred, a lot of organisms that were anaerobic, who didn't like oxygen, had to live underwater or live deep underground or live somewhere other than in association with the atmosphere. So it was certainly a big deal. So biological climate change is nothing new. What we're capable of is extremely rapid climate change. And because we've invented a culture that's extremely fragile, that very rapid climate change will probably damage us most significantly first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most probably.
But yeah, technologically, we are absolutely unique. But Earth has been through many mass extinctions before. And
you hope it will survive us as well.
I am absolutely confident that Earth will have no problem surviving us. I mean, they're organisms living in environments that we can't get close to. And they're very interesting and very creative and very determined to keep on going.
Mm. And what is your take? What do you think our chances are, Chris?
I think our chances are not good unless we wise up.
Huh.
Certainly if you think in the time frame of a couple of centuries.
Right. Which is nothing in evolutionary terms.
Right.
Yet it's everything in history, in human history at this point. Yeah, we're suddenly living interesting times.
We live in very interesting times. I mean, we are on this spiral of very rapid technological development. And where that's going, I think, is very difficult to predict. But I mean, it's certain that we cannot count on biological evolution based on differential reproduction to make any of the changes that need to be made in the way we deal with the world.
Yeah, it doesn't seem adequate anymore.
Right.
The time scales are just
right.
just not right.
We don't have a few 100,000 years to figure this out.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we've been through plagues before, as you were saying, and you know, if you think of the Black Plague that has been with us for many years, centuries, probably altogether, and it was a time where religion actually was reinforced, because the only thing that gave that gave a meaning to what was happening. They didn't have science then. Do you see, Davor? Do you see anything that the religion and the pandemic have to do with each other today?
Well, religion can be pandemic. You know, that is one thing. So all sorts of different systems of ideas or ideologies, and religion is one of them, can be extremely dangerous and can also be very beneficial. Depends on the kind of system of ideas we're talking about, and of course how people understand those ideas and how they implement them. It's very difficult to talk about religion, generally speaking, because it's very unclear what do we mean by that. And if you ask 100 people, you will get 100 different responses, and at that point it becomes a very useless concept. But I would say that it is one way of making sense of the world, and in essence, in pre-modern times, very often what we nowadays call science and what we nowadays would call some ideologies within the socio-political sphere, all of that belonged actually also to the sphere of religion, and also medicine and many medical treatments and many scientific inventions, also in different parts of the world, actually happened, took place within something that you could generally call religious or religious philosophical system. So it's a very complicated story, but I think an important part of that story is the values and intentions behind certain ideas and certain practices. So just as certain forms or certain forms of understanding of religious ideas can be extremely dangerous and can actually produce a lot of violence and wars and fanaticism, so can certain nowadays, let's say, economic theories. I mean, if you think about religious fundamentalism and free market fundamentalism, it's very difficult to say what's different, except that nowadays free market fundamentalism produces much more harm than religious fundamentalism. So these concepts, I'm always very careful when we use them, because, and of course, they also mean different things in different parts of the world. So based on people's experiences, and one thing is to talk about religion in the Middle Ages, another thing in the Roman times, and another thing in the Soviet Union, and nowadays, let's say, North America. So all these different meanings of particular concepts have their local, what I like to call, flavors. Something that is like those things that are not necessarily rationally present in our understanding of the concept, but have all sorts of these emotional and aesthetic elements the way what they intimately mean to us, depending on our experiences and how, for example, certain concepts are advertised on TV or somewhere else.
Yeah, I like that what you said about free market fundamentalism. It's really the plague of our times. If you look a little deeper, that we've kind of locked ourselves in a system where, in order to survive, each individual has to compete and has to produce more and has to tax the, the resources of this planet even more. The work that it used to take 100 people to do, today we need only one. And then you have 99 other people that are busy justifying, doing some work to justify getting paid, basically.
Absolutely. And there is also this other element to that, as one contemporary philosopher, Slavoj Žižek, said, we live in such interesting times in terms of the amount of ideological indoctrination that just belongs to the culture, to the air we breathe, that we can imagine easily the end of the world. We can imagine all sorts of disasters and the world coming to an end. But what nobody can imagine are slight modifications within the capitalist system. That's impossible to do. So raising a little bit of taxes or redistribution, that's beyond imagination. But yeah, the end of the world is something that we can easily imagine. So that shows what's the dominant, if we want to use that term, religion of our time. So those things that we don't think about and we simply do them, that's what comes pretty much to the literal definition of ideology.
Yeah, the most optimistic among us are hoping that this crisis that we're living will bring some kind of waking up. And I don't know. I have my doubts. What do you both think about that?
Chris?
I could certainly see this crisis, if it unfolds slowly enough, giving people a certain amount of space to reflect and perhaps come to a different understanding of things. What I think argues against that possibility is what Davor was just describing in terms of ideology. Our communication systems are so good right now that it may be impossible to actually separate people from their ideology. And profound changes in attitude require a separation from ideology. And that kind of separation can happen not involuntarily. It can be imposed. In many cases, it happens voluntarily. In some cases, it happens, it seems, as just kind of a gift, a happy accident, as opposed to something that's actually sought out. But my concern is, and this is, I think, a very practical concern for a community like SAND, is how can one go about, in a sense, separating people from their ideology in order to provide the space in which reflection on what's going on can happen, and a change of attitude becomes possible.
Well, you described the relationship between people being attached to their ideology in a very strong way and communication system. I mean, I didn't quite follow that one. Can you say again? You said that the communication system were so good that it was becoming difficult to separate people from their ideology.
Well, think about the internet, right? The internet divides up into ideological ecosystems that, I mean, people often describe the internet as a collection of echo chambers. And that means that whatever your ideology is, it's very easy to find reinforcement. And it's very easy to find reinforcement exclusively. It's very easy to wall off criticism in a way prior to
in the past you were exposed to
right.
different viewpoint, whether you want it or not. Today you can choose to surround yourself only with people who think the same way.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If I may just I think this is very important what Chris just explained. So on the one hand, there is this, and it's very clear, social networks and all different ways of personalized interface and so on and so forth. We witness to this simple fact that most people are actually operating within pretty homogeneous ideological spaces where they are confronted mostly with the kind of stuff that they are likely to enjoy. But the problem is that behind all these different pockets and worlds that rarely interact among themselves is the same corporate logic that actually structures in symbiosis with new technology, of course, which structures that interface. So the reason why certain things are not there for you to see based on your previous history of interacting with various ads and so on and so forth is because somebody can profit based on that. Somebody can exploit what used to be the public sphere, but nowadays is getting more and more privatized. So I think it is a very new situation. And when some people were proposing, for example, we can also see another dimension just to add to what Chris was explaining. When we think of this global crisis, you have those voices who are saying things that sound obvious. But there, in this obviousness of certain things, is always where you find ideology. So things that seem very simple and very kind of plain common sense are very often those ideologically extremely charged. So one of those plain simple things would be, let's have a global coordination so that we can establish certain systems that would be able, in case of some future pandemic, to efficiently react and provide, save us and provide some kind of safe space against all possible crises. But then you ask a question, but who is likely to be in charge of those global systems? Is it a worker from, I don't know, Madagascar or Indonesia, or somebody who actually takes care of their environment and their neighbors and so on and so forth? Or is it those much more powerful global corporate structures and political structures who would most probably, based on what they have been doing, coming together not to save the species and the planet, but to add another billion to their pockets? So, and that is a challenge that is really difficult to confront, because I think the scale of problems has reached such complexity that it's very difficult to translate that into something that a lot of people in the world will just understand and adopt as their strategy for changing those sociopolitical structures to be able to confront all those significant issues, including global pandemics and environmental crisis and so on and so forth. So how do you translate this complexity into an action without going through some filter of ideology, because ideologies just also can be understood as just a system of ideas. So in a certain sense, it's unavoidable. But how do we move from bad and simplistic ideologies that are part of the problem, not part of solution, to those systems of ideas and ideologies, if you will, that would be explanatory and would bear a potential for real change and improvement in various domains? That's the real issue that's very rarely discussed, and especially it's totally absent from any of the mainstream media.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And when one thinks about, for example, scientific collaboration, one can see this very clearly. Now, for example, the people doing molecular epidemiology on this current virus are able to analyze in real time hundreds of new viral sequences per day. And in order to understand what the virus itself is doing, how many substrains are there, how prevalent are there, do they have any differences in lethality or transmissivity or anything like that. And that capability is completely dependent on the internet. It's completely dependent on the last 30 years of technology development that has brought the cost of DNA analysis down by many orders of magnitude. So it's completely dependent on exactly the sort of system that you described. Yet it also provides probably our best hope of understanding what's going on. I mean, I think another interesting example to think about is the open software movement, where again, completely dependent on technology development and the internet, we now have very complex software systems that are built by thousands of volunteers that are not centrally coordinated in any way, except by a mechanism for, in effect, peer review. And this has changed in a sense, the economic structure of the software industry enormously. So there are ways that these supporting organizations support organizations on top of them that can be very creative. So I think that I don't really want to say contradiction or conflict, but the deep kind of incompatibility between very democratic ways of doing things and very centralized ways of doing things get combined in these systems in ways that lead to surprising sorts of phenomena.
Yeah, definitely. And this is this is all new. This is all new. We can say that we've had many plagues, we've had many pandemics, we've had many crises over time, but it has never been in an environment which has this much access to information, this much access to computer power, this much access to collaboration in a way. So there is something new about these times, right?
I mean, looking as a molecular biologist at the difference in understanding achieved with this pandemic and say the AIDS pandemic, it's astonishing how different it is. I mean, things are being understood within weeks in this case that required years in that case.
Right. Hmm. And that's certainly giving us a little hope for us for change.
Yes. Yeah.
I always like to quote Gramsci and his famous line that we should always keep the pessimism of the mind and optimism of the will. So I think that is it's a realistic, looking realistic. You know, we should be critical, but even if our reason tells us that it's all going in a wrong direction and it's hopeless, we should still keep this optimism of the will, meaning that very often the things are much more complex than we can possibly comprehend. So actually trying to change the course of events can bring about a change that nobody could even dream of. So therefore, there is always hope as long as we want to do some kind of change.
That's a very, very good remark. I thank you for bringing that up. Yes, we are embedded in systems that are much more complex than we understand and are guaranteed to surprise us.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, certainly the natural world has that characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
Davor, I think you were bringing some interesting points before on where the difference between for our species is it tends to live in we tend to live in our head. We tend to live in representations, and we tend to superimpose those representations over the world, and that changes. That influences the way we think of being special or not being special, and that also is linked to the way that we treat other species, and that the way we treat other living and non-living uh, things in the world. And I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Well, it's I mean, we started in preparation for this conversation just to kind of give our viewers a little bit of a background. So we put out some questions and ideas and some kind of pretty simple observations. And one of them was that in a certain sense, we live with this paradox that our personal experience is always that there is the world outside, out there, and there is us, and there is this interaction between us and the world. Yeah, it sounds pretty simple, and it seems to be true, but except that nobody can actually prove that. And another problem is that all these interactions, and Chris actually will be in a much better position to talk about that. Those interactions, so that what we perceive or what appears to us as objects in the world, other beings in the world, and our working different stuff in the world, that all of that is actually something that happens not out there, but happens in our head. So based on all series of sensory experiences and what our brain does with them, and how it does it based on our previous experiences, and so on and so forth. So those representations of our interactions with the world is something that happens in our head. And in a certain sense, the world is present in our head. And we cannot even, it's not clear what it would mean not to have such kind of mediated experience of the world, because if we try to shut down all these sensory experiences, we'll end up not actually having probably any representations or any ways of doing or behaving in any meaningful way in this world. So I think these the way in which we make sense of these representations goes back to the story about ideology. So how we understand and how we construct certain meanings vis-a-vis those experiences that we have. And that very often is the place where then we need to make certain choices, and we need to take a stand vis-a-vis things that we do or that appear to us that we do in the way we interact with the world. So one of them is, how do we treat other living organisms? So one way is to construct a narrative which says that our primary purpose here is to use whatever we can for our benefit, no matter what. And we can not only kill any way we want and torture other animals, but also other human beings. And we idea that we do all sorts of things, but there is a good intention behind that, and that seems to be also, I mean, we can discuss that as well, but it seems this moral sense that it is also part of our biological property, because everyone has this instinctive idea to justify what we do. Even if we do the most horrific things, we do that under the pretense there is a rationale that is somehow good. If you go to the worst gangsters and you ask them, why do you do that, there is some rationale. They'll probably tell you, there is some higher good purpose for their family, for themselves, and so on and so forth. So we adopt these narratives also when it comes to the rest of our environment and the planet. And it is also something that where we are free to make this choice and say, well, whether that will be the rationale and whether our actions in this world or our interactions with all those representations that we have in our head vis-a-vis the world will be using them for these kind of purposes, based on these kind of rationales, or based on something else. So there is nothing really compelling us to see in this world, the way it appears to us, just a place that we want to exploit. We can do that, but there is nothing compelling us to do that. Just as there is nothing compelling us to see other animals and other fellow human beings as a source of profits or, again, exploitation or something that benefits me, as opposed to benefits everybody within a community or the global community. So these choices are something that's then based on, again, certain narratives and certain values. How do we establish them? How do we cultivate them? That's a whole different story.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris, I was interested when you were talking about the different pieces, where switching subject, where the different pieces of the virus came into our history, and you said it was only the third time, something I didn't really quite catch on, but maybe you want to explain that a little more in depth.
Were you asking about the work being done on analyzing where the various bits of coronavirus came from, or endemic viruses in humans?
Both.
Well, let me start with the second question, because it actually illuminates the first. Viruses are basically little packages of genetic information that are protected in one way or another against the environment. And their role in evolution, if you think about evolution at a large scale, is to move bits of genetic material around between different lineages. So if you look in the world of microbes, in the world of bacteria and archaea, then these organisms are exchanging DNA amongst themselves over very long kind of genetic distances in lineage. And if you ask what kinds of DNA do they exchange, mostly they exchange DNA that's useful for dealing with some local environmental challenge. So some microbial population may be really good at doing something like digesting petroleum, and some other microbial lineage moves into that environment. There's a reasonably good chance that they're going to acquire some of that DNA that will help them digest petroleum. And we see this all the time in the phenomenon of antibiotic resistance. Microbes don't have to each one evolve antibiotic resistance on their own all by themselves, because they can get it from their friends. And they get it via transmission with little packages of DNA that we call viruses.
Mm-hmm.
So viruses play a very important role in life. They're a communication medium from the point of view of large scale, kind of long time range evolution. They're a way of moving information around. And they're very good at it. And so to come back to the first part of that question, if you look at some population of viruses that inhabit some population of environments, say some group of species of animals, then they're going to be moving around and say some cell in your body becomes infected by 2 different viruses from different sources. And when viruses get into your cells, what they do is replicate. So they're going to be replicating at the same time, and it means that you'll have some hodgepodge of genetic information from the 2 different viruses getting recombined with each other. And so you'll create all sorts of molecular diversity. And most of those molecules won't be able to survive. They won't be able to live within the little protective coatings that they have to live in when they're out in the open environment. But some of them will. And so you get very rapid evolution. And it's not just one strain slowly varying in one environment. I mean, of course, you see that. But you also see this very broad kind of recombinatorial mixing, especially over longer time frames. So if you think about coronaviruses as a family that inhabit large numbers of different species of various kinds of animals, then you expect them to get together now and then and produce hybrids that mix together DNA from viruses in different lineages, and then that new construct lives however it lives. So again, it's an unpredictable, complex system.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fascinating. And I would love to ask more questions about this, but I get a message from Ronald saying that we're running out of time. And so do you have any last remark you want to share with us, either of you? Some pearl of wisdom for those times?
Chris?
I've just been speaking, so I would turn to you.
Well, I mean, I would just, to repeat what I mentioned before about, Gramsci's advice, and I think what we know about human beings so far, it's not a lot, but it's something, is that there is a good news and a bad news. And the good news is human freedom, and the bad news is also human freedom. So that we have this opportunity to think and act in creative and productive and constructive ways. And that can be beneficial for us as human beings, but also the rest of the species on this planet, or many of them. Or we can use that freedom the way we often use it, and that's to be destructive toward the environment or ourselves, our society, and so on and so forth. So it's really, I think, critical that people kind of wake up on this individual and collective level, and shut down a little bit all those nice gadgets and devices that they interact with all the time, especially in the time of lockdown, corona pandemic, and try to interact more with each other, exchange ideas, read more, and mobilize their forces, personal forces and capacities and collective forces to change many of those extremely destructive processes that are currently going on, and not just now, but already for some time. So I think, yeah, human freedom can be both positive and negative news, good and bad. What will prevail depends on us.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you, both of you, so much for this contribution to our Wisdom in Times of Crisis event. And have a beautiful rest of the day.
You too. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, thank you very much.